He wasn't just an NBA champion, he was a walking headline. While the league sold discipline and legacy, Dennis Rodman lived in chaos, excess, and rebellion. Fame didn't save him. It amplified everything. This is the story of how pushing every limit turned a basketball icon into the NBA's most unpredictable legend. Welcome to Off-Court Truths, where we uncover the hidden lives, extreme choices, and untold consequences behind basketball's most unforgettable and controversial legends. Dennis Rodman's story didn't begin under bright lights or championship banners. It started in silence, poverty, and isolation. Growing up in Dallas, Rodman was an introverted, overlooked kid, awkward, insecure, and invisible. He didn't play organized basketball seriously until late in high school, and even then, no major program wanted him. He attended a junior college, nearly quit the sport entirely, and drifted through his early years with no clear identity, no confidence, and no sense of belonging. Then something unexpected happened. Rodman grew, physically and mentally. His body changed, his competitiveness ignited, and basketball became the one place where chaos inside him made sense. By the time he reached the NBA, Rodman wasn't polished, talented, or graceful. He was relentless. He outworked everyone. He embraced the dirty work no one else wanted: rebounds, defense, intimidation. That obsession turned him into one of the greatest defenders and rebounders the league has ever seen. On the court, he became indispensable. 5 NBA championships, Defensive Player of the Year, a central piece of dynasties in Detroit and Chicago. But off the court, Rodman was unraveling. Fame arrived faster than emotional stability. Money amplified insecurities. Attention fed impulses he never learned to control. The same fearlessness that made him elite also pushed him toward extremes: partying, defiance, self-destruction. And as Rodman's star rose, so did the chaos surrounding him, setting the stage for a lifestyle that would push every boundary the NBA had ever known. The breaking point for Dennis Rodman came when fame stopped being an escape and became a trigger. During his years with the Detroit Pistons, the league tolerated his intensity because it was contained within structure. Chuck Daly gave him boundaries. Teammates absorbed his volatility. Winning justified everything. But when that structure disappeared, Rodman began to spiral. After leaving Detroit, he entered a period where his identity was no longer anchored by a system or a purpose. Basketball was still there, but control was not. The moment the chaos fully surfaced was in the mid-1990s, when Rodman's behavior off the court began to overshadow his value on it. Binge drinking, reckless partying, public defiance, and emotional instability became recurring headlines. According to reports from the time, Rodman openly struggled with depression and self-destructive impulses, often masking pain with provocation. One incident, in particular, alarmed the league. Rodman vanished for days during the NBA season, later admitting he had reached a dangerous emotional low. What once felt like rebellion now felt like collapse. Coaches questioned whether they could trust him. Teams worried about liability. Media narratives shifted from eccentric star to uncontrollable problem. The NBA watched closely, unsure whether Dennis Rodman was still a player to manage or a disaster waiting to happen. That uncertainty marked the moment his lifestyle officially crossed the line from spectacle to threat, setting off a chain reaction that would define the most chaotic chapter of his career. Dennis Rodman's descent into chaos didn't happen all at once. It unfolded in stages, each phase revealing how fame, insecurity, and unchecked freedom fused into a lifestyle that blurred the line between legend and liability. To understand how Rodman pushed every limit the NBA had, we have to trace the timeline from disciplined dominance to public unraveling, and finally to a form of survival few expected. The first phase was control. In Detroit, Rodman thrived inside a system that demanded obedience and rewarded sacrifice. Chuck Daly understood him better than anyone else in the league. Daly didn't try to change Rodman. He gave him structure. Rebounds were his currency. Defense was his language. Within the Pistons' bruising identity, Rodman's obsession had a purpose. He won Defensive Player of the Year, helped anchor championships, and built a reputation as a nightmare matchup. The chaos existed, but it was contained, channeled into winning. That balance collapsed when Rodman left Detroit. Without Daly's presence, his emotional center cracked. In San Antonio, the Spurs hoped his talent would outweigh the risk. Instead, the lack of boundaries exposed his instability. Practices became unpredictable. Commitment wavered. The relationship with the organization deteriorated quickly, culminating in infamous moments of defiance and disengagement. Talent was no longer the question, trust was. The next phase was spectacle. By the mid-1990s, Rodman was no longer just an NBA player. He was a cultural lightning rod. His hair color changed weekly. His tattoos multiplied. His outfits challenged every expectation of what a professional athlete was supposed to look like. Interviews became performances. Controversy followed him everywhere. According to contemporaneous reports, Rodman leaned into the attention, using shock as both armor and release. The more the world stared, the further he pushed. Then came the nights that defined his reputation. Binge drinking, public partying, relationships that played out across tabloids and television screens. At one point during the season, Rodman disappeared entirely, later admitting he had spiraled into a dangerous emotional place. The league watched nervously. Teams questioned whether they were witnessing rebellion or breakdown. Fans debated whether he was a genius provocateur or a man unraveling in public. And yet, in the middle of that chaos, basketball refused to let go of him. When the Chicago Bulls took a chance on Rodman, it was a calculated gamble. Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen needed what Rodman could provide: rebounding, defense, and an edge that no opponent wanted to face. Phil Jackson believed structure could coexist with freedom, as long as winning remained the priority. In Chicago, Rodman entered a strange equilibrium. Absolute dominance on the court, absolute chaos off it. This was the peak of his contradictions. One night he would dominate the paint, grabbing rebounds over players half a foot taller, suffocating offenses with relentless effort. The next he would be photographed partying all night, showing up late, or defying expectations in ways no other player could get away with. The Bulls tolerated it because it worked. Championships followed. Rodman collected rings. The league looked the other way, uneasy but captivated. But the lifestyle was accelerating. Fame fed impulses that were no longer checked by fear of consequence. Rodman crossed into territories the NBA had never dealt with, openly challenging gender norms, mocking authority, and aligning himself with figures far outside the sports world. Each step pushed the league into uncharted territory. He wasn't just testing rules, he was testing cultural boundaries. As the Bulls' dynasty ended, so did the illusion of balance. Without the gravitational pull of winning, Rodman's chaos lost its justification. His later stints, brief, unstable, forgettable, reflected a player whose body could still compete, but whose lifestyle had consumed the framework needed to sustain a career. Teams hesitated. Roles diminished. The spectacle remained, but the foundation was gone. By the time Rodman drifted out of the NBA, the timeline of his career read like a collision between greatness and self-destruction. He had won championships, redefined defense, and changed how individuality looked in professional sports. But he had also burned bridges, frightened organizations, and lived at an emotional edge that few survive intact. This timeline isn't just about excess, it's about escalation. Each phase pushed further than the last until the chaos that once fueled greatness threatened to erase it. Dennis Rodman didn't simply live outside the rules. He forced the NBA to confront how far it was willing to let a star go before drawing a line. And the most unsettling truth is this: without that chaos, Dennis Rodman might never have become a legend at all. To understand Dennis Rodman's extreme lifestyle, you have to understand the psychology that lived beneath the tattoos, the colors, and the defiance. Rodman did not seek chaos for attention alone. He sought it because chaos felt familiar. His childhood was marked by abandonment, instability, and a deep sense of invisibility. He grew up feeling unwanted, unnoticed, and emotionally disconnected, and those wounds never healed when fame arrived. They were simply covered. Basketball gave Rodman structure, but it never gave him identity. He didn't see himself as gifted or special. He saw himself as replaceable. That belief fueled his obsessive work ethic on the court and his reckless behavior off it. Rebounding was control. Defense was purpose. Everything else in his life felt uncertain. When structure disappeared, His mind filled the void with excess. Rodman used shock as armor. Each outrageous act, each public confrontation, each night of self-destruction was a way to stay in control of how the world saw him. If people were staring, they weren't abandoning him. If he was controversial, he was still relevant. Underneath the bravado was a man terrified of silence, terrified of being forgotten, and deeply uncomfortable with emotional vulnerability. Depression followed him quietly through his career. According to Rodman himself, there were moments when the lifestyle wasn't rebellion, but escape. Alcohol dulled pain. Fame distracted from emptiness. But none of it addressed the core issue. A man who never learned how to exist without extremes. Dennis Rodman didn't break rules because he wanted to destroy the system. He broke them because chaos was the only place he felt alive. The climax of Dennis Rodman's story came when the chaos he had lived inside for years finally turned inward. In the late 1990s, at the height of his fame and notoriety, Rodman reached a breaking point that went far beyond missed practices or tabloid headlines. According to Rodman's own later accounts, there was a night when the excess, the isolation, and the emotional weight became unbearable. The rebellion stopped feeling empowering. The attention stopped feeling protective. What remained was a man alone with the pain he had been running from his entire life. During this period, Rodman disappeared from the public eye for days at a time, prompting concern inside and outside the league. When he resurfaced, it became clear that the lifestyle pushing every limit was no longer performance. It was survival. Teammates and coaches described a player whose intensity had turned unpredictable, whose emotional state felt fragile beneath the bravado. The NBA, which had tolerated his behavior as long as championships followed, quietly began to worry about something far more serious than discipline. This was the moment when the myth of the untouchable eccentric cracked. Rodman later admitted that he had come dangerously close to ending his own life during this time, a revelation that reframed years of excess as warning signs rather than spectacle. What fans had consumed as entertainment was, in reality, a prolonged cry for help. In that moment, the question was no longer whether Dennis Rodman could keep playing basketball. It was whether he could survive the life he had built around it. The chaos that once fueled his greatness had reached its most dangerous edge, forcing him to confront a truth he could no longer outrun. Without change, there might not be a future at all. The consequences of Dennis Rodman's lifestyle arrived quietly, but they lasted forever. By the time the championships ended, the tolerance that once protected him was gone. Teams no longer saw a necessary evil or a competitive advantage. They saw risk. Coaches worried about reliability. Front offices worried about liability. The league that once bent its rules to accommodate his chaos began to distance itself from the man it could no longer control. Professionally, Rodman's career faded not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow erosion of trust. His later NBA stops were brief, unstable, and unremarkable. The body that once dominated the paint carried the scars of years of punishment. The energy that once terrified opponents now burned inconsistently. Without structure, without stakes, his greatness lost its anchor. Basketball moved on, even if the legend did not. Off the court, the damage was deeper. Relationships fractured. Financial problems followed. The same fame that once insulated him became isolating. Public perception hardened into caricature. The wild man, the clown, the sideshow. Few stopped to consider what the behavior had cost him internally. Mental health struggles, addiction, and loneliness replaced the roar of arenas. When the cameras turned away, Rodman was left alone with the silence he had feared most. Culturally, his impact was complicated. Rodman changed how individuality looked in professional sports, proving that greatness did not have to fit a single mold. But the price of that freedom was steep. He became both pioneer and warning, celebrated for his courage, pitied for his self-destruction. Dennis Rodman didn't lose his legacy. He paid for it. Dennis Rodman's comeback was never about returning to dominance or reclaiming a place in the NBA hierarchy. It was about survival. After the league moved on, Rodman was forced to confront a life without the structure, adrenaline, and constant noise that had once kept his demons at bay. The silence he had feared for so long finally arrived, and it nearly broke him. In the years following his playing career, Rodman drifted through a series of public appearances that often reinforced the caricature the world had built around him. Reality television, professional wrestling, tabloid moments, each offered attention, but none provided stability. Behind the spectacle, Rodman struggled with addiction, financial problems, and untreated mental health issues. According to his own admissions, there were periods when he felt lost, ashamed, and unsure of who he was without basketball. But slowly, something shifted. As time passed, Rodman began speaking more openly about his pain, his childhood trauma, and the emotional damage he carried for decades. He acknowledged that much of his chaos had been a response to abandonment and insecurity, not rebellion for rebellion's sake. For the first time, he wasn't performing for an audience. He was explaining himself. That honesty resonated with people who had once dismissed him as a joke. Rodman also found moments of unexpected purpose. He reconnected, imperfectly but sincerely, with family members. He participated in NBA events that reframed his legacy, reminding fans of the brilliance that once defined him. And while his highly publicized trips and diplomatic gestures later drew mixed reactions, they reflected a man still searching for meaning, still trying to belong somewhere. This wasn't a clean redemption. There was no triumphant return, no final act that erased the damage. But there was growth. Rodman didn't become someone else. He became more aware of who he was. His comeback wasn't about fixing the past. It was about learning how to live with it. For a man who once lived without limits, that acceptance became the most difficult victory of all. Dennis Rodman's story forces us to confront a difficult truth about fame and individuality, the very traits that made him extraordinary. Fearlessness, defiance, and emotional honesty also left him dangerously exposed. Freedom without boundaries became a burden. Attention without understanding became isolation. Rodman showed the world that greatness does not always look disciplined or composed, but he also revealed how easily brilliance can slide into self-destruction when pain is never addressed. His life reminds us that rebellion is not the same as healing. Expression is not the same as peace. And being seen is not the same as being understood. Rodman didn't fail because he was different. He suffered because no one, including himself, knew how to protect that difference. In the end, his legacy is not just about championships or controversy. It is about the human cost of living without limits and the quiet courage it takes to survive the chaos you create. Dennis Rodman lived louder than anyone the NBA had ever seen. If you want more stories the league never explains, comment the next name we should uncover on Off Court Truths.